This episode discusses interpretations of historical and fictional material. While every effort has been made to present accurate information, some sources offer competing perspectives. Listener discretion is advised, and we welcome respectful dialogue about any discrepancies or questions. Hello, and welcome to Facts versus Legends. I'm Neo, your host. This podcast explores the origins of legends and how they intersect with historical evidence. Today's episode begins a two-part examination of one of literature's most recognizable horror figures, Count Dracula. In this first part, we will analyze the literary creation of Dracula, outline the plot and themes of Bram Stoker's novel, and trace the historical and folkloric influences that informed the character. Count Dracula was introduced to the public in Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula. The character quickly became one of the most influential figures in Gothic literature and the broader horror genre. Over the decades, popular culture has attributed various supernatural abilities to Dracula. These include transformation into bats, wolves, or mist, superhuman strength and speed, hypnosis and mind control, resistance to conventional weapons, near immortality. Common weaknesses across adaptations include vulnerability to sunlight, though in the original novel, he is merely weakened by it, repulsion by garlic, holy symbols, and running water, destruction by a wooden stake through the heart, the inability to enter a home without invitation. These traits evolved through adaptations in film, literature, and television and do not uniformly appear in Stoker's novel. The novel begins with Jonathan Harker, a solicitor from England, traveling to Transylvania to facilitate a real estate transaction with Count Dracula. After a perilous journey, Harker arrives at the Count's remote castle and soon discovers he is a prisoner. While there, he witnesses Dracula's supernatural abilities and encounters 3 female vampires, commonly referred to as the Brides. After escaping the castle, the narrative shifts to England. Harker's fiancée, Mina, and her friend Lucy Westenra become central figures. Lucy falls mysteriously ill and develops signs of vampirism. Despite the efforts of Dr. John Seward and Professor Abraham Van Helsing, she dies and later returns as a vampire. Her suitors, Seward, Arthur Holmwood, and Quincey Morris, join Van Helsing to destroy her undead form. The group discovers that Dracula has traveled to England using boxes of Transylvanian earth to preserve his strength. Mina becomes a target, leading the group to pursue Dracula back to Transylvania. In the final confrontation, Dracula is destroyed before reaching the safety of his castle. Bram Stoker did not invent the concept of the vampire. He drew upon an established literary tradition that includes The Vampire, 1819, by John Polidori, often cited as the first English vampire story. Carmilla, 1872, by Sheridan Le Fanu, features a female vampire and themes of seduction and aristocracy. These works help define the vampire as a seductive and aristocratic figure, which influenced Stoker's portrayal. Stoker relied on secondary sources for his depiction of Transylvanian culture. Notably, Emily Gerard's essay Transylvanian Superstitions, 1885, which introduced the term Nosferatu to English readers and discussed local vampire beliefs. Travelogues and historical texts consulted by Stoker in London libraries. There is no evidence that Stoker traveled to Eastern Europe. All descriptions of Transylvania and its customs in the novel were informed by research rather than personal experience. Count Dracula, Vlad III, Vlad the Impaler. Vlad III Dracula, 1431-1476, also known as Vlad the Impaler, was a prince of Wallachia. He earned his nickname for executing enemies via impalement, a method intended to intimidate opponents and solidify power. Historical sources, such as those by German and Ottoman chroniclers, describe his rule as extremely violent. Estimates suggest he ordered the deaths of tens of thousands. Despite the brutality, some Romanian accounts regard him as a national defender against the Ottoman Empire. Stoker's notes, archived at the Rosenbach Museum, reference a book called An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia by William Wilkinson. This source includes information on Vlad III, and it is likely where Stoker encountered the name Dracula. However, there is no direct evidence that Vlad III served as the model for Count Dracula beyond the name and general theme of violence. Van Helsing is described as a Dutch professor with expertise in medicine and folklore. Some scholars suggest Stoker may have been influenced by Max Müller, a German-born philologist and mythologist. However, no conclusive evidence links the character to any specific individual. Harker may have been partially inspired by Stoker's friend, Joseph Cunningham Harker, a set designer at the Lyceum Theatre, where Stoker worked. These characters reflect contrasting ideals of late 19th century womanhood. Mina, rational, educated, and loyal, often seen as a traditional moral center. Lucy, flirtatious and less restrained, possibly reflecting contemporary anxieties about social change. There is no confirmation that they were based on real people. It has been proposed that Seward was inspired by Dr. William Seward, superintendent of Colney Hatch Asylum. This theory is based on shared name, profession, and setting, though no direct evidence confirms the connection. Morris is portrayed as a gun-wielding American. Scholars have drawn parallels to Theodore Roosevelt or William F. Buffalo Bill Cody, both of whom were internationally known during Stoker's life. However, this remains speculative. Often marketed as Dracula's Castle, Bran Castle loosely resembles Stoker's fictional description. However, there is no historical connection between Bran Castle and Vlad III, no indication that Stoker was aware of this specific castle. Stoker visited Whitby in 1890. During his stay, he learned of a real shipwreck involving a Russian vessel, the Dmitri, which may have inspired the Demeter's arrival in the novel. The town's Gothic setting and local graveyard also influenced Stoker's writing. In the novel, Jonathan Harker recovers from brain fever in Budapest. This was a vague term commonly used in 19th century literature to describe emotional or psychological distress. It is not a modern medical diagnosis. Although the reference to Harker's recovery in Budapest is fictional, the city was the site of a major medical breakthrough in the 19th century. Hungarian physician Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, working in Vienna and Budapest, identified the cause of childbed fever, puerperal fever, in maternity clinics. In 1847, he implemented hand-washing with chlorinated lime, which dramatically reduced mortality rates. This discovery laid the foundation for modern antiseptic procedures, though it was initially dismissed by the medical establishment. Stoker's Dracula is a work of fiction. However, it was built upon literary precedents, e.g., Carmilla, the vampire, folklore from Eastern Europe, especially as described in secondary sources, historical references, including the name Dracula from Vlad III, themes reflecting Victorian-era concerns, including gender roles, science versus superstition, and fears of the foreign or unknown. Stoker did not intend to write a biography of Vlad the Impaler, and the vampire Dracula is best understood as a composite character, a product of literary tradition, folklore, and late 19th century imagination. In the next episode, we will move from fiction to history, focusing on the life of Vlad III of Wallachia, the figure most commonly associated with Count Dracula. We'll examine primary historical accounts, assess his political role in Eastern Europe, and determine how or if he inspired Bram Stoker's character. Thank you for listening to Facts vs. Legends.